You said that for some countries to take them forward, i.e. to achieve the greatest amount of utility, maybe you should suspend some of those rights and some of those principles of the system. Yeah. So we can't say that those weren't attempts to actually implement secular values. Okay, some of these countries will say, no, there was no attempt at all, it was just complete chaos.
Can I ask one more thing?
Yeah, but there were many of these countries where, but just to come back to this point.
Okay, you said quite a lot. Or just
to finish the last sentence, was that his point was that these were secular models in implementation, they failed. I've kind of tried to show that they were secular models, and yes, they have failed. And I think you've had to kind of agree that they were secular models.
Well, I think all models,
and they did fail. But you say that those fails were actually successful.
Yeah. I think all models are secular. They're just real secular and pretend secular. But I've got one important question I haven't asked you, and I want to ask you. To many non-Muslims, by far the most objectionable thing about Islam is the doctrine of apostasy, which says essentially there's no exit, you're not allowed to leave. Now, there are alternative revelations, there are many religions. Muslims are 1.1 billion people out of 6.6 billion, there are approximately 1/6 of the earth. There are Christians who I know very well who believe they have the monopoly of truth and that their revelation is correct. The really, I think, disturbing thing to many Western minds about Islam is the refusal to accept the right of exit. Why can you not leave?
Okay, so if we look at the view towards this issue in Islamic law...
Because I know, I play cricket with a lot of Muslims, I've got Muslim relatives, and they are not... An awful lot of people have to pretend to be Muslims, don't they?
Okay. Right, now, in terms of the issue of the ruling on apostasy, yes, it is the fact that in Islamic law, the apostate is actually discussed with. Yeah? So first of all, if someone makes his apostasy apparent, it's obliged to actually enter into a dialogue with that person in order to produce convincing arguments to show them maybe their misconception or misunderstanding of the Islamic law or the Islamic beliefs.
So if you understand it correctly, you must accept it. You couldn't understand it correctly and reject it.
Yeah, so if someone understands it correctly, then obviously they would come back into the fold of Islam. There wouldn't be a punishment imposed on them. If it were the case that they were to reject, then the punishment would be imposed. The reality of that law is that effectively it's a guarantor for the society, i.e. it's a guarantor of the system, and someone who actually brings that is effectively in the same position, you could say, in a Western system of someone who is committing treason against the state. So it's a public act of insurrection. So having said that, it is quite a harsh punishment, but nevertheless, that's what the Islamic law sets as a way to protect the system.
So you can't make an intellectual judgment about the truth of the religion without being punished. Now, unless you make it correctly.
Now, of course, the issue is here, someone would reject, someone may find that absolutely abhorrent. Yeah? You may find someone as a Muslim who wants to leave Islam, says, I reject the fact that this law exists. I reject all of the elements of the Islamic belief. Now, what we would usually expect, if you're in a society that's completely dominated by that way of life, is actually the system in application. In all of the affairs of life, it's referred back to that system. What normally would happen, someone would leave that land. So the reality is that people would be free to leave. They wouldn't have to say, what's my reason for leaving? I'm an apostate. They would be free to actually go to another place where they found the atmosphere and environment more in tune with their own values. The same way someone can live here in the West and say, I don't like the environment anymore.
So you wouldn't actually want Sharia to be global then?
So what I'm saying is that, effectively, someone would have the choice to leave the Islamic belief. And they would have to, they have the choice to leave the Islamic lands in order to avoid that punishment. So we do actually believe that that is a system that is divine. We believe that when it comes to the rational argumentation, that any issues that are raised would actually be dealt with. So for that reason, we don't see it as unacceptable to implement a punishment on those who reject it.
I think we're going to take, I think we'll just take one last question. So who wants to be honest? Alright, let's jump from there.
Okay, this is actually a question to Lincoln Allison. I do apologize if I did miss it, but throughout the entire debate, I haven't actually seen you present a model for any country in terms of its governing system. Maybe you've discussed that, okay, it should be utilitarianism, whatever it may be, the people should be able to decide for themselves. But in terms of a government system, I haven't seen one presented yet. So again, for the context of Egypt, where would you say, or how would this, system of secularism be implemented? Is it one, as you suggested in the past, colonialism is good, it's worked? Is it one of colonialism, where it's a few people who decide how it should be for the whole world, regardless of how it affects them? Or should it be a case where these people are elected and they're put into government and these people decide what is right and what is wrong? Could you please present this, and I'd like Jamal Deen to respond possibly.
I did say one thing about it, and I'll repeat it, and that is, in the words of the Baron de Montesquieu, I believe in mixed government. Government based on different, diverse and contradictory principles. So government with elements of democracy, aristocracy, monarchy, maybe traditional legalism and religion as well, but genuinely mixed. Now that's one of the very large parts of thinking behind the American Constitution, for example. So the American Constitution is in fundamental ways not democratic. That is to say, the Constitution is immensely difficult to change and acts as a constraint on, you can't vote for socialism, because the rights of property ensconced in the Constitution say, were there to be a great popular movement for socialism, which there never has been, it would be declared illegal by the courts. So democracy is mitigated by some fundamental principles. So the one thing I did say about forms of government as I'm in favour of mixed government. Sharia is unmitigatedly not mixed government. It would only be mixed government if you could volunteer opt in and out of Sharia, it seems to me. If you imposed it on anybody at all,
so has
it
there
would
been
be
a
unacceptable.
practical example of that anywhere in history?
I wouldn't. Well, sort of, because I think the British Empire and India worked like that essentially.
British Empire.
You could. I know somebody objected. It's only in certain aspects of personal law that Islamic law held in British India, but it did. If that's the law you wanted to be subject to, that's what you said you wanted to be subject to, and you couldn't. It was actually pretty difficult to opt out because of the communal pressure. So yeah, it seems to me well rooted in the great rich tradition of 18th century thought. Montesquieu, Burke, Hume, all believed in government as I do. We have mixed government in this country, don't we? We have quite a strong electoral element, but we have lots of other elements as well, and we very much limit the expression of democratic fervour through the elections because, our system, we have a second chairman that isn't elected, and I would advise that it never should be, and so on. We have an Anglican church, which is an established church, which is the official religion, etc. But we don't make anybody join it.
Okay, I think I'll invite Mr. Jamal Deen for his final 5 minutes, just to summarise.
Okay, so in summary, to refer back to the basis of the discussion, it's about secularism and Sharia. Which system is the way forward for humanity? Which system is the way forward for the Islamic societies as well, in particular? As I addressed, looking at the issue of the secular values, the secular system, and in particular with Lincoln's discussion today, looking at the issue of utilitarianism, effectively we're seeing a system that is arbitrary in its basis. So its fundamentals are that it makes a judgment about what's right and wrong, what's good and bad, what's beneficial, that despite all of the terminology involved, is ultimately arbitrary. We can see examples of that where it's being applied as a philosophy, and we can see how the thinking around this issue fundamentally comes down to something that is not possible to determine, i.e. that what is the benefit that individuals or groups of people actually, what would be lift and raise the benefit that they would access as a whole, and therefore you lift the utility of the society. When we looked at the different issues, for example euthanasia, when we looked at the issue of right to life, for the case of abortion, when we looked even the case of an infant child, in all of these cases we found the basis used to judge what was beneficial for society, which rested upon something that's disputed, i.e. is it more beneficial, is the life that a disabled person will be living, is it more beneficial for them or society? I.e. would they be able to provide some sort of utility and some sort of enjoyment from their life? Someone else may see the same life lived with no utility, no benefit whatsoever. So So a system that makes that the basis of judgment for right and wrong is one that is inherently arbitrary, i.e. it is not actually a rational assessment, a rational calculation of what's beneficial for society, but rather it stems from a basis that is flawed. When we look to the Shari'a model that I discussed at the beginning of today's event, and I still refer to throughout, effectively what we're looking at is a system that gives a certain basis for the rights and duties of citizens within the society, for Muslims and non-Muslims. It caters for the economic interests of the society, guarantees people the right to property, guarantees them the right to seek their own prosperity, as well as giving them basic rights of healthcare, education. This is what we aspire to when we see the Islamic system in implementation. It also has a framework of punishment, a framework of judicial measures which ensure that it protects the values and protects the society at the same time. So you have a framework of laws that present solutions for the problems of the society. You have a framework that presents a punishment system that deals with and deters crime, deters negative behavior that would actually reduce the cohesiveness of the society. And fundamentally as well, it promotes a sense of cohesion in the society because it builds values within the people that enable them to live together. So it avoids the social atomism that we see in Western societies today, the breakdown of society, the breakdown of the family that affects and plagues the society, is actually addressed through the Shari'a law from the point of view of the individual's interaction with one another, because of the atmosphere that's promoted, as well as the legal framework. So in summary, because of all of these elements, we see very clearly, we have a great deal of confidence that when Muslims live by the Sharia, when this system is implemented in a society, that will take humanity forward. Because fundamentally they're referring to a system that's not arbitrary, it's not actually referring to made-up principles, but actually builds for society a system where there is an agreed and regular framework of rights and duties. Thank you.
I suppose the obvious question to put is, in 1400 years, why has it never happened? And why does it not look remotely like happening? And why is there always chaos, bitterness, division, and so on in the world in which Muslims live? And I'd argue because they don't face up to the realities of the human condition, that what you call arbitrary decisions have to be made. What you call impossible decisions, I would merely call difficult, have to be made. That there are no absolute guidelines. We move on constantly, and we move on. The very uncertainty, nuance, difficulty of philosophical life is what defines the mental state that allows for progress. And I'm afraid everything I've heard is confirming